Hello, my name's Hannah. I'm from the Lethbridge Transparency Council, and I'm here interviewing Ben Christensen, a city council candidate for the Lethbridge municipal election. So welcome, Ben. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you very much for the invitation. I very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we're going to get started right away here. The first question I have for you is, what do you think needs improvement in the processes of city council and administration, and how would you plan on making those improvements?
So part of the reason that I chose to run for council is because I saw some flaws with the current leadership. Not so much with their character or their personal attributes as just in their overall effectiveness as leadership and their ability to, I guess, lead. And so for me, one of the important aspects of our city's leadership is obviously having key leadership that's able to both lead in our community, but also be able to make important decisions that are informed and that actually consult members of the community, seeking both sides of an issue before making that decision. I've always followed sort of a philosophy that I call, I have an acronym for it, it's called TADRD. And it's TADRD, which is topic, awareness, discussion, resolution, and then decision. And so I think that process certainly applies, especially to municipal leadership. There's going to be topics that come up. We need to create awareness for those topics, to hear feedback from both sides. There has to be discussion. From that discussion, we then take that to a resolution phase that we can propose a resolution and make that decision. And I think what needs improvement right now in our city's leadership is just that transparency and the ability to better consult the public and the taxpayers on the decisions that are being made.
Yeah, I can certainly agree that transparency and accountability are important. So that leads us really well into our next question. So what recommendations would you make to engage more citizens in the city's municipal development plan and process?
Sorry, I'll have you repeat that.
Absolutely.
A minor distraction there for a second.
No problem. What recommendations would you make to engage more citizens in the city's municipal development plan and process?
So I from what I've seen thus far, there is a level of public consultation, but it seems for the most part that a lot of that consultation is taking place digitally. And Lethbridge has a very large community of elderly and senior citizens who aren't always tech savvy. And so they've kind of been left behind. They've lost their voice because they haven't been able to keep up with modern technology to be able to voice their opinions effectively. And so I would like to see more of the old style town hall type of meetings where members of the public actually are informed through some sort of publication of a meeting, and that they actually have that opportunity to attend in an open council type of environment to be able to voice their concerns, be it in favor of or opposed to be able to share their concerns and to have those concerns heard by counselors in person who can take notes and actually make from those interactions a more effective and informed decision on municipal issues.
Yep, absolutely. So what do you think the top 3 issues are in our community, and what would you do to address these issues?
So it's interesting. I really like that question. It's a very adaptive question. When I started campaigning back in April, and put my name in as a candidate. Back then, the three main issues definitely were the big three of homelessness, addictions, and some issues surrounding COVID. Since April, we've evolved a little bit, and some of those have kind of dropped off the radar as an important issue, and what's come up now as a more important issue, and I think should be a priority for incoming council, is transit reform, because decisions were made with the transit changes that really did not consider or consult transit users and patrons in our city. And the unfortunate byproduct of that is now our transit users have been very adversely affected, including specifically patrons with limited mobility issues have been very adversely affected by the changes, because they're required now to go. I've heard complaints of people saying they have to go as much as 2 kilometers up the road just to catch a bus to connect with the downtown that takes them to the rest of the city. And that's a disservice to people with mobility issues in our community. Now, to make up for that, they have gone ahead and offered handy bus access to sort of offset that. But as I understand it, that service is actually quite badly backlogged as a result, up to, I've been told sometimes up to a week-long wait time. And that's a serious failure. So transit reform, I think, needs to be the number one. We need to figure out what went wrong with that decision and what we can do urgently to bring things back to a state where people are able to commute effectively in our city. The other two, obviously, that I mentioned are the issues of homelessness, housing, and the subsequent mental health and addictions issues that our community are facing. With housing, there is a serious shortage of available housing right now in our city. I myself am looking for a space to live, and it has taken me 3 months to find a space to live. There's a few issues that contribute to that. One is that we have property managers and property management companies who've come into the city. They've tried to sort of game the markets, which has resulted in a lot of rent prices going through the roof. And unfortunately, that is a disservice to our community. Those rent prices need to be reasonable for the economic circumstances that we have. And right now, rent prices are certainly not reflective of that. So the city needs to look at options. If I've even mentioned in the past, potentially extraordinary measures to gain control of that situation so we can focus on addressing the housing crisis that we have. And then, of course, finally is the addictions side of things and the opioid crisis that we're facing. Our city has the resources, I think, to be able to build effective detox centers that allow people to get the treatment they need in order to recover from addictions. And a part of that includes better access to mental health services, because mental health is a big contributor to addictions in our community. So I would like to see a focus on how we can go about making those services more accessible in our community and taking steps to allow for a future where people facing addictions in our city can not only get the help they need to get off the drugs, but also gain access to accessible housing once they've left those programs so that they don't relapse. And a lot of questions have come up and a lot of controversy has happened over the safe or supervised consumption sites in our city. And I really do empathize with that situation. I think that the objective coming into that was very, very noble, but there was some very poor planning at the municipal and also the provincial levels of government in implementing that. There was no continuing care after a patron attends those services. And so all we're doing is providing a Band-Aid solution that continues to promote addictions rather than actually taking those people and saying, hey, you're dealing with addiction. How can we help? And is there something we can do to help get you care so that you can get away from your addictions, get the help you need to conquer those addictions, and be able to become a functional member in society again? And that's not to say that people who are struggling with addictions aren't. I've actually met one individual the other day who that was exactly what he expressed. I was talking to him in the park, and that was one thing that he said, is that he struggled with addictions, and a big contributor for him was the fact that after he went through treatment, he was thrown right back out to the street with no aftercare or anybody giving him access to resources to help him find housing. So that again is a failure on the municipal level that we really need to examine. And I've been looking into programs out of Calgary and surrounding areas. There is a program that's been very successful in Calgary and Edmonton that actually offers transitional housing as a part of their program. So I'd like to look at facilitating a relationship with that service provider and seeing if we could actually facilitate a similar program that they have successfully run in Calgary and Edmonton in our community as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for those well thought out answers. So what would you want the city to do to create a good environment for business specifically in Lethbridge?
So that one, I am a small business owner myself. I work from home. And so I haven't really seen as much of the impact of COVID on myself as a lot of our commercial business fronts located in downtown and the surrounding commercial areas. The unfortunate impact that we've had is twofold. One, that COVID-19 has really had a dramatic impact on our businesses' ability to remain open in the city because of such restrictive lockdown measures that have been put in place. The other issue that we have is, in part, that people are afraid to attend the downtown area because of the opioid crisis, because of issues with vagrancy and transiency in the downtown area. So in order to improve the economic situation, we also need to improve the social situation in our city. The two go hand in hand. In order to improve things for the economic situation, the economic side of our city, especially in downtown, we need to address those social factors first so that we can promote a safe and welcoming downtown that's a part of our vibrant future in the community. And that's not to say that we need to chase all the vagrants out of downtown and send them packing. That's not to say that we need to get rid of all the junkies in downtown and put them out of sight. It's simply a case of these are issues that have impacted business owners significantly because they have flooded the downtown area in our community. And that's in part a failure on community policing, who are in part responsible for addressing those issues. But it's also a failure on city council for not having the foresight to be able to see that this was a growing problem in our city and to take action when they had that opportunity to prevent it and take preventative measures to help reduce that burden that's been seen. A part of the other issue with downtown business is obviously property taxes and the cost of running a business in downtown. Right now, our property tax, both residentially and commercial, is one of the highest in the province. And unfortunately, that has also impacted business owners in our community in a negative way, because their costs have not only had to go up to cover those expenses, but in doing so, they've had to raise their prices, which deters people from wanting to buy local. So we need to strike a balance, and that balance is figuring out a way to tackle the social issues while at the same time incentivizing our small business owners and new small business owners to find Lethbridge as an attractive place to do business.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a balance that most politicians are trying to find, is between that economic and social, that sweet spot that I think we're all looking for in one way, shape, or another. So
I think that's probably the most difficult part of any leader's job, is to try and find that balance.
absolutely, completely agree. So moving on, in the most recent MDP process, what decisions did you agree with? What decisions did you disagree with?
So the municipal planning, I've looked a little bit at it, and one of the I looked at some of the upcoming future planning that has been done, and I like that our city's council is willing to look as far as 10 years into the future with that plan. It's an ambitious goal to think ahead and to look at planning that far into the future. However, the limitation we face with that is that council is only elected for a 4-year period at a time. And every time we look that far into the future with our planning, we're failing the future of our community, because we're not thinking about those changes in making these decisions to plan that far ahead. So there is a lack of consideration for potential changes and potential viewpoints that may differ from decisions that are made for a 10-year plan. The other complication is planning things, up to, to try and plan something within a 4-year period can be very difficult as well. It may seem like a long period, but it actually goes by very quickly, and it's very limiting in what somebody can accomplish or get done. I like the city's vision for our future. There's a lot of recommendations in that plan that make plans for and allocations for improvements to infrastructure, to roads, to community safety projects, to improving parks and recreation. These are all great ideas. There's also been a big focus on improving the downtown core. Where I disagree with that view is that we're focusing finances, resources, and planning on improvements to the downtown core, but we're not facing the elephant in the room, which is the social issues. Those need to be addressed first before we can start making an aesthetically pleasing downtown that's alluring to everybody. Nobody's coming downtown if they're afraid of vagrancy and transiency, as I mentioned. The other failure, I think, is the lack of planning for that third bridge that has been a topic of discussion. Every year that we neglect the fact that there is a growing demand in our city for better access and improved access to the west side and to residents of the west side, we are actually shooting ourselves in the foot financially, because every single year with inflation, that cost is going to go up. 10 years ago, if we had explored this could have been a $50 to $75 million project, whereas now we've left it alone and thought about it and meandered around the idea, and it's now a project that would cost in excess of $150 million. If we keep forgetting about the west side residents and giving improved access to the ongoing growth and demands on the west side, eventually it's going to be unaffordable for us to even consider doing such a thing. So we really need to look strongly at considering that third bridge and start making plans to lock down a project that allows for it. Because if we don't do that now, it may be too costly and far too late in the future for that sort of a plan to evolve.
Absolutely. And I think that dovetails really well into our next question here, which is just talking about how you would prioritize transit in Lethbridge. So I know you talked about transit reform. This also is talking about the prioritization order. So prioritizing pedestrians and bicycles and transit kind of before commercial and single vehicle traffic. Is
Right.
there anything else that you kind of like to add on that topic?
Well, I mean, we do a pretty good job of categorizing things into different priorities in our city. I think we've got a fairly well balanced approach to appeasing all of those groups, but there are failures. One of the failures is obviously the mass transit reform that we just had, as I mentioned, is a huge failure. Another big failure is road construction, improvements to the roads, and the amount of time that those projects are projected to take versus how long they are actually taking. I know of a few construction projects downtown, and this ties into some of the concerns I've heard from downtown businesses and owners. The Third Avenue construction that has been ongoing was supposed to be a 6 to 8 week project, and it has gone now from May all the way into October, which spans several months. The longer these projects go, the more it's costing the taxpayers. And so we need to start cracking down on these timelines and city contractors and saying, these are your deadlines. A good example of that sort of municipal interaction is the Ring Road project in Calgary, which took the city, it has been under construction for 11 years. The city of Calgary finally put sanctions in place where that construction crew, if they did not finish by a certain deadline, would be fined a certain amount per day for each delay in the project. And I think that that needs to be considered here in order to light a fire under these contractors and motivate them to get these projects done on time, under budget, and within the projected timelines, because downtown business owners are not happy with the delays that these have caused. If they've lost traffic, they've lost business, they've lost customers, because nobody wants to drive downtown through 6 blocks of construction with several detours in the way. So that's probably one of the biggest pushes I think we need to change in going forward, is that we need to improve upon road construction and how that's planned, how that's executed, and keeping those contractors accountable to the timelines. Because I've even myself been driving down a road and suddenly there's construction, and I wasn't notified as a resident that that was planned. So we also need to focus on notifying residents more effectively of those projects, because nobody likes the surprise of a 3-minute detour when they weren't expecting it.
No, I certainly can say that when I have an appointment and I'm already cutting it close, coming up on surprise construction definitely is not my favorite either. So that kind of brings us into our last section here. So where do you think the city should spend more money, and where do you think the city should spend less money?
Well, that is a complex question. City budgets by themselves are very complex. I mean, I was looking at one of the budget documents last night, and it's over 300 pages. So it's a lot of work to review those budgets and to really make those decisions, or to even sort of inform oneself as to financial decisions without looking at the bigger picture and figuring out in detail, actually going over those budgets in their entirety and saying, okay, well, where can we spend less money? Where can we spend more money? But my answer to that, first and foremost, I would like to look at the photo radar program in our city. I would like to examine if it's achieving the scope of its objective, and if it's not, I think we need to scrap it because that is a very costly program to run in our city. And from my perception as both a candidate for council and as a citizen, I can't count the number of times that I've heard people refer to it as a cash grab, or the number of times that I've heard people complain that they've gotten a photo radar ticket that they felt was unjust. So to me, that tells me that that program is not being operated effectively or being used for the scope which it was being funded to achieve, which is to reduce speeding in trouble zones. So if we're not achieving that objective, why are we spending the money for us to have contractors out there doing it and using it as a cash grab? And better question is, if it is a cash grab, where are those revenues going? How are they being allocated? And why are we not being more accountable on how that money is being spent? That ties in part into policing. And I've had a lot of questions come my way about my stance on the cuts to the police budget. The city made a very difficult decision to cut over $1 million out of police budgets last year. Some people have been very critical of that, saying that that has contributed to the spike in crime in our city. And I don't believe that's the case. I believe from my own experiences that the lack or the increase in crime in our city is more a lack of accountability from policing in our city. And so cutting that $1 million and where city council decided to allocate that funding, I'm not sure, but that's something I think that would be better served to improve services for first responders like our EMS and fire department, because they are actually operating efficiently and providing the service that they're contracted to provide in our community. Right now, our city's policing are not doing that effectively. And there has been a lot of scrutiny and a lot of confidence lost in policing in our community for exactly that reason. I believe that every single department in our city is a piece of that big machine, and those moving parts all have to work together. If one of those parts is not working, the entire machine ceases to work. So we need to look at the failures that have happened, how we can improve those failures. And we also need to look at taking city budgets and programs, figuring out where they can be better allocated to be more effective in that grander scheme and that giant machine within our city. But also we need to understand, right now, Lethbridge is paying the highest taxes in the province. And I have questions about why we're paying such high taxes. Where are those resources being allocated? Why are the taxes as high as are? What's caused that demand? And how can we reduce that burden? Perhaps look at easing the tax costs on homeowners and business owners in our city, but still effectively use our budgets. And right now, I think that the biggest failure is that no one really knows the answer to that question, which is concerning to me.
I also would like to know where our money is being spent and why. So I completely agree with you there. And that kind of leads us to our last question before we wrap up here. So sure. What criteria do you recommend the city examine prior to approving capital projects? And on our current capital project that we have, what expenses are you most in favor of and what expenses would you not support?
Well, as I said, looking at the capital projects, it's quite a lengthy undertaking. The document itself was well over 300 pages, and I did have a chance to look at some of the proposed improvements from capital projects in our city. I do believe that we do need to improve upon some failures that have occurred. One is parks in our city. We have a budget to pay city workers to go out and maintain our parks. There's no reason why our city workers should not be out there keeping our parks up and doing that maintenance. That is a part of the city budget. And I've heard about communities in our city where the residents have had to step up and do that work because the city is failing. So I think we need to ask some questions there. Why is that happening? Why are these people, is it a case of these workers are not doing their job? Is it a case of there's a breakdown in communication in scheduling that work? So we need to work with the city manager's office as well as those communities that are being affected and figure out where the breakdown is happening so that we can better improve on that and actually make an improvement that allows for us to spend money on other improvements to city parks and recreation. City parks and recreation is a big one in our city. People love our parks. People love our pathways. They love our city parks. They love our dog parks, especially, I know, are very popular with city citizens and pet owners in our city. So I would like to see those spaces maintained adequately because people are going to be deterred from using them if they're not. But as I've mentioned, going forward into the future, one of the things that hasn't been touched on in that capital projects is the west side access. There's nothing about it. There's nothing in the budgets that shows any sort of consideration or projection for costs or even a plan for it. And that tells me that we're not planning for that in our future. That to me is concerning. I've lived on the west side, and if there is an accident on one of those roads, it's bad enough, to the point that it actually congests traffic right back up into the downtown core. And our downtown core is not big enough to handle that kind of traffic. So we really do need to explore a better option for accessibility to west side residents in our city. And that I did not see that on the capital projects. That is something that we need to look at putting on the capital projects for the future, because it is as I said, the more we put it off, the more we ignore it, the more expensive and costly it's going to get. And eventually it may get to a point where we just simply can't afford it at all. And that's going to actually harm our city's future instead of helping it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and astute realization in the capital plan. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
There's one other thing I will add to that, and that is that I also do think with the growing population in our city, we do need to look at improved policing and community presence for policing on the west side as well. The west side is sort of growing into its own extension of our city that's it's still a part of our city limits, but it almost is like its own separate lifestyle. It's almost like a second part of Lethbridge. And so we need to look at, as that west side grows and develops, which it has, we need to look at growth and development of the essential services and infrastructure in our city to meet that growth. That means improved roads. That means improved access and presence to emergency services, police, fire, and EMS. And the one thing on the west side right now that is lacking is that we do not have a single or secondary detachment available on the west side that would make policing more accessible to west side residents. So I think that although I have been critical of policing, that is something that we do need to consider in our city's future for policing going forward.
Thanks, Ben. And thank you so much for doing this interview. How can people get in touch with you if they would like to talk to you more about any of these issues?
So on the City of Lethbridge website, my cell number is posted. People are welcome to call and leave a voicemail or text me. I will do my very best to respond to every inquiry that I can. I will also, I also have my website that tells people a little bit more about my goals, my background, and my ambitions for our city's future, which is christensenforcouncil.com. Sorry, christensenforlethbridgecouncil.com. And then, of course, the most accessible means that I have is my Facebook. So I'm on Facebook, Christensen for Council YQL. And then I also have my email, which is Christensen, the number 4, and then council at Spectre, SPECTRE, strategy.com.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your perspectives. So thank you for agreeing to participate in the interview, and I look forward to seeing how the results go on election day.
Excellent. I thank you very much for doing this for our city, for your time and attention to improving upon the future of our city, and for also taking the time to reach out and ask these important questions.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.